Can you lead us in prayer?
Let's bow everyone. Loving Father in heaven, we thank you for this morning you've given us to come together to worship as a family and as your people. We're thankful for our brother David and all the work that he's been doing, and we're very excited to hear about those things and all of the great things you have done through his hands over there in Africa. And we pray that we continue to be an encouragement to him. Please bless this time we have together. Let it be attentive to what he has to say. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, good. It's good to be with you all here this morning. And Lori sends greetings. It's Karen as well. I already talked with them this morning. I get up every morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, because Zambia is 6-7 hours ahead. And they wanted me to send you greetings. Lori did not come with me today. We brought our 2 grandkids back with us. They're getting their American citizenship and everything. And so she's been staying home, not traveling with me this year, because she wants to take them to where they can be a part of the church and youth group and that kind of thing. And so she was going to come with me in this trip, but I don't know, some things popped up at the church that the youth were involved in. And you know how it is with teenagers, you never can make any plans. So keep changing everything to do. So anyway, she's sorry she wasn't able to come with me today. If you're not getting our newsletters, I would love for you to sign up for that. If you would just write your name and address on a piece of paper and give it to me, and also your email. We send it out by email, and then we have a different version we send out by mail. And they're different because the email, it's shorter stories and more pictures and even videos, and I'd like to get one or both of those. Feel free to do it. It didn't cost anything to send out an email version of it, but I'd love to send that. We also have Facebook, and every week I put pictures and stuff on the Facebook. But all that information is on some brochures that I'll lay out between class and the service, because I forgot to do it a minute ago, but I'll find a place and lay those out. And you can pick them up. The yellow one will have all the information about Facebook and all that. We've been in Zambia now for 18 years, and I kind of want to start off with kind of the main thing that I think maybe you'd like to know about, and that's why we should be doing what we're doing in Africa. Why is it so important that we be in Africa, training leaders for the churches in Africa? And the reason is you may be aware the gravitational center of Christianity has shifted south of the equator pretty much. And so now Christianity is what we call the global south. There are 700 million people in Africa now that claim to be Christian, which is really, well, look at what's going on in the Western Hemisphere, North America, all of North America and Europe combined. And you can look at how many people are claiming to be Christian, but when you really look at church attendance, because we know what's happening in this country with people going to church. And about maybe 200 to 250 people go to church on Sunday in the Western world, compared with 700 million. And by the year 2050, they're saying that there'll be 1.3 billion people claiming to be Christian in Africa. Compare that with the next South America, it'll be twice as many as in South America, and much more than the most populous country was Asia. There are 3 areas that I think we really ought to be focusing in missions the most, and I think that's China, India, because India is so receptive and they're going to have the biggest population in the world. China, because they're becoming such a global power. And then Africa, because that's where the greatest receptivity is. And I'm very much want to see, I'm very concerned about Christianity growing in those areas for those reasons. We have 3 main ministries that we have in our work in Zambia, which we call Daybreak, Mission of Hope. And the Bible College is the primary ministry that we're involved with. And I'm going to focus most of my attention on that, but I want to touch on these other 2 humanitarian ministries that we're engaged in. The primary school, this is something that Lori has kind of focused on, and she started, and she pretty much kind of works with that, oversees it and everything. And that's because, she's a school teacher, master's degree and all that in education. So this is kind of her baby. And so she focuses on that. We have a primary school that has grades K through 7. We have capacity for about 250 students that can attend our primary school. We started this because this is not a school in our area, which raised a problem with the fact that there was not any school for our students, children of our students and staff to go to. And we have about 30 to 60 kids on our campus, and there wasn't a school for them. So kind of by necessity, we needed to start it. But then we wanted to do something that would provide quality education. Africa doesn't, for the most part, does a very, very, very poor job with education. They don't emphasize youth, they really emphasize older people. You know, we're a youth-focused culture. I mean, you can see this, go to a fellowship dinner in a church in America, and we let the kids go first, you know, and then the adults go. But in Africa, it's the opposite. I mean, the old men, and then the men, and women and children get what's left over. You know, they just don't focus on youth that much. And yet, half the population of Africa is under 18 years of age. And they just do a very poor job of resourcing where the real need is in Africa. And that also applies to spiritual education, Christian education, because a lot of our churches in Africa, they don't have anything for the youth or the young people, or the children. Worship services tend to last 2 to 3 hours, and that's a long time for kids to sit through a worship service, and there's nothing for them at all. And they don't have Sunday schools, most of the churches. They just kind of, this is something they don't think about. In fact, when they call it youth ministry, they're talking about 20 and 30-year-olds who are not married. They don't even think of children in youth, what we call youth ministry. So we think that's a real problem in Africa because they're leaving their kids at home, which really worries me about the next generation, especially since half the population is under 18 years of age. So we wanted to start and do a quality education, and we're really working to beef up the academic performance, but also we wanted to do Christian education in our primary school. And one of the things we did about 2 years ago was we hired one of our best students, he and his wife, 2 of the most spiritual students that we had to go through our program at the time. We hired him to be the campus minister to focus on the spiritual life of the children in our primary school. So the campus minister does daily chapels, teaches Bible classes, and goes and ministers to the families of our students, especially those living off campus, which helps us with our outreach program. We started a church in Shimabala, one of the main little townships near our campus. We got a new church there. I'll probably say something about that in the next newsletter. And so this is part of our outreach, but there's also something very important here because we're wanting to get our Bible college students in our Bible college. We want to get them and their wives to come over into the primary school and get experience teaching children. We want to learn how to be a school teacher, so when they go back to the village, they might start a village school in their churches and do some quality education at that level, and that will elevate the influence of our students when they go back to the village, when they're providing such a service in the village is very much needed. But we want them also to learn how to do Christian education, you know, spiritually touch the lives of the children in the village. And since very few people are worried about children in the village, and our students go and work with the students in their spiritual lives, boy, they'll have a mighty influence on those children when they grow up to be adults, especially you realize in Africa, children really don't leave home and move very far away from their house or their home of origin, their family of origin. So we're really trying to teach our students and their wives how to work with children in Christian education. And they get practical experience working in our primary school, learning how to do that. Now, we've done several things in the last 2 or 3 years to improve our primary school because we've kind of been focusing on that here recently. We hired 6 new teachers, replaced 1 or 2 that didn't have adequate education. So now we've got 12, as good as training as they can get in Africa, in Zambia anyway. We got 12 good teachers. We also, this was a very important thing we did, we hired a man who's working on his master's degree in education, an intelligent man, a spiritual, very spiritual man, and his wife, she's also one of our school teachers. And he is the assistant director working with Lori. They talk almost every day, we have this little app called WhatsApp. You know what that is. We can text, we can video chat or voice messages or phone calls, and it doesn't cost us anything because it goes over the internet, and that's how we communicate with our staff in Zambia. I sometimes joke, I know what's going on one side of the campus before they know what's going on the other side of campus because of the internet. And I'm not kidding you, I've sometimes had to inform Karen something's going on the other side of campus. My daughter Karen, who stays there permanently. And so anyway, Lori and Wakando talk every day, as I do with the Bible college staff, and he's doing an excellent job raising the academic and spiritual environment of our school. And then, as I said, a campus minister to work with the primary school students. We also built 5 new classrooms about 2 years ago, which allowed us to, back up a second there, which allowed us that now every grade, K through 7, every grade has its own classroom with its own teacher. Up to about 2 years ago, we had to double up, but now every class has its own teacher and its own classroom. So we've got a very good school in place, and we just finished work on an auditorium, which now we can do community events and school programs, which helps bring the community into our campus, which is part of our outreach program to the community around our campus. So that is our primary school. Now, a few years ago, we started a lunch program because we noticed a lot of the kids coming to our primary school were very malnourished. According to the UN, Zambia is the most malnourished country in Africa. And the reason is because they eat little more than corn. That's about 85–90% of what they eat is corn. And then they have a few vegetables with it that they kind of dip in a vegetable. They roll it up, this corn, they pound it, cook it. It's like turkey dressing, except it's bland, it's white. And they take that, roll it up their hand, dip it in a soup bowl, and that's what they eat. And they're getting very little protein. It's nothing but starch, and that's why Zambians are so malnourished. And so we saw a lot of the kids coming to our primary school. They were seriously malnourished. They missed a lot of school because they were sick. They were lethargic. They didn't play much at recess. They didn't laugh. They just kind of, very lethargic. So we started this luncheon program, and it cost us about $12 a day to feed these kids. It made a big change real quick. It shocked us how much. I mean, these kids, we started noticing they're laughing. They're playing at recess and kicking the football around, soccer ball. They also stopped missing so much school because of being sick all the time. They got healthier, and boy, they started making a big difference. So now we've expanded it to breakfast also. So we got a good school over there. People are starting to want to send their kids to our school because it's academically good. It's got the spiritual component, and it's making these kids healthy. And it's making a big difference in these. You see, half the kids of Africa die before they're 12 years old. And it's the biggest problem is not malaria, it's really malnourishment. Because you see, if a healthy kid gets malaria, they usually survive it. But when you're so malnourished and you get malaria or dysentery or something like that, that's why we have 1 million children in Africa dying every year. The real problem is not malaria, it is malnutrition. So our lunch program, it doesn't cost us that much, but it makes a big difference in the lives of these children. So our primary school is making a big difference on children in our community. Then we have a children's ministry we call Karen's Kids. This is a ministry my daughter started about 14 years ago. She stays there permanently. She's kind of become our chief administrator in Zambia. I talk to her every morning at 4 o'clock when I get up to deal with stuff. And she but her passion is really working with the children. Because we noticed, as I mentioned a minute ago, half the children die before they're 12 years old. But as we got to Zambia, 18 years ago, we quickly realized that the reason so many children are dying is because they're dying in the first 2 or 3 years because something happens to the mother. The mother dies in childbirth or soon after, which is very common still in Africa. A lot of the mothers are so malnourished, Zambia being the most malnourished country, not surprising. A lot of the mothers are not adequately able to nurse their children. Or the mother has HIV/AIDS, 1/4 of them do. And if they nurse their children, there's a 25% chance they pass the virus to their child, and their child dies within 2 or 3 years. So most of these children are dying in the first 2 or 3 years of life because something's wrong with the mother and she can't or shouldn't nurse the children. But they don't have an alternative to nursing. They can't afford cows. You have to have land. You have to pay for it. Milk's expensive because of the same reason. And they certainly can't afford baby formula that costs about $50, $60 a month. So to respond to this, Karen, the biggest thing she does is she will provide baby formula for up to 2 years for these children she identifies that are in critical need. She also will provide sometimes medical assistance to some of the children that are kind of on her roll of children that she's helping, and then maybe some other children in our community. Sometimes she will even help with children who have special needs, like this Carol, who now has died, but Karen did help extend her life for quite a few years, and she had a healthier life until she did die to get some disease or something came along and killed her. Here are a few pictures of some babies that Karen has helped recently, and I put this picture up there. When Karen sent this to me, I looked at it and I kind of said, something's wrong with that picture. It started bothering me. I couldn't figure out what is wrong with that picture. Can y'all figure out what's wrong? Something's abnormal there. That baby's plump. I just saw that and I thought, something's wrong with that baby. And then it dawned on me, the baby's healthy. It's plump. You don't see chubby babies in Africa. They're all skinny as a rail. That kid's healthy. He's on baby formula. So anyway, so those are our two humanitarian ministries. So now let me focus on the Bible College, because that is our primary ministry. And that's kind of where I focus, as well as administration and fundraising and so forth. But my focus is on the Bible College. Lori on the primary school, Karen kind of with Karen's kids, but I'm focused on the Bible College. We have a large auditorium that we can do a lot of different chapel, worship, Sunday mornings, graduation, lectureships, and then we have a classroom in our auditorium as well, which allows us to have, when we want to get all 3 classes of our students, all of our students together in one place. Like in July when I was teaching a class there, I taught 3 classes and I had to use that big classroom. But then we have a small classroom that we have, and then there's another small classroom that's in our office building. So that means that we have first year, second year, third year students. That means every one of our classes of students have their own separate classroom. And then we have a classroom that's just for the women's program. So the women, they do Bible studies and all that, but they also teach them skills and sewing, and so there's a lot of things that go on in that. They have their own dedicated place because we want to train the wives of our students. In fact, our students who are married have to bring their wives, and their wives have to go through our women's program, or they can't come to our schools. It's a requirement, so they have to promise to do that. We have 30 married student apartments. They're just simple 3 rooms. There's no indoor toilets or kitchens. They have light bulbs, but that's about it. And the reason is because we don't want to increase their standard of living. Our students come from the bush. We want them to go back to the bush. We don't want them to get used to city living. We don't want to ruin them. We're trying to keep it just as simple as we can. So those are our 30 married students. And then we have a dorm that we built. We finished that about a year ago. In fact, right now we're having to redo it because I was trying to cut on costs, and I used a bunch of particle boards, and I didn't realize that termites were that bad. I knew they were bad. They got in the wood and they've eaten it up. So we're having to rip it out and put in concrete blocks now. So anyway, we've got a dorm for some of our single students that we have. So when you count up all our students and their wives and the single students, we have capacity for about 90 to 100 students. I do not want to go any more than that, and I'm fighting our American DNA here, because we Americans, we want to upscale everything. Bigger is better, and I'm telling you that is not true. If you lose quality when you vamp up and try to mass produce everything, especially when you're dealing with people. There's a minimum proficiency, and we've reached it. I don't want to go any bigger, so don't evaluate us on how many students. We're after quality. I'm going to explain why that's so important to us, because that is what is number one. I want quality more than I want numbers. but we have capacity for that. We've had over 600 students that have gone through our program in the last 18, more than 600 in fact, that have gone through our program these 18 years. The last 4 classes that have graduated from our school are the best that we've ever produced, and there's a good reason for that, as I'm going to tell you in a minute. The quality of our graduates has really increased, much better here in the last 4 or 5 years. The students that we have graduated. Now, our mission statement says that we're there to train and develop self-supporting spiritual leaders who are equipped for holistic rural ministry. There's 3 parts to that. We want to train men who are self-supporting, who are not a burden to the churches, trying to get money from the churches, because churches can't afford full-time preachers in Africa. We're not a preacher training school at all. We're not training American preachers. In fact, this whole full-time preacher thing is an American thing. Africa can't afford full-time guys. We want them to be self-supporting ministry. Second, so we want to train, we want to be self-supporting. Second, we want to equip them to do holistic ministry. That's ministering both to the physical and the spiritual needs of people. Because when you're dealing in a poverty-stricken world where there's so much suffering as you find in Africa, you can't ignore the physical. In fact, to the African, if your religion doesn't help you with the physical, it is of absolutely no use to you. It's worthless. There's a real, you can't, we divide this physical and spiritual in Africa. They don't. You can't do it in Africa. They're one and the same. So you can't ignore the physical needs of people. We want to equip our students so they can minister holistically to the needs of both spiritual and physical needs of people. And then the most important third component of our mission statement, and this is by far the most important, we want to develop spiritual leaders for the churches of Africa. If we don't do anything else right, this is the one thing we want to make sure we get right. I want to emphasize that. We're after quality. This is very important. I want to explain why. What we're talking about here is what I call spiritual formation. Call it obedience, call it discipleship, call it life transformation, whatever. I call it spiritual formation. Now, you ask, why is that your number one priority? Why are you so focused on the spiritual formation of the students, their spiritual life? Why is that? It's more important than teaching them a lot of Bible. Why is that your number one priority? Well, here's the reason. Zambia is very receptive, like most of Africa. 85% of Zambians claim to be a Christian. You may or may not be aware that there are twice as many people that go to church on Sunday in Africa that go to church in all of North America and Europe combined. And if it wasn't for Catholics, I shudder to think it would be 3 or 4 times more. But we have more people attending church in Africa. And there are now more members of the Church of Christ and more churches of Christ in Africa than there are in the United States or in North America, in fact. And as I said, Christianity has moved to the Southern Hemisphere, especially to Africa more than anywhere else. However, what we have is we've had explosive growth and it's spread wide and far, but it's not got roots yet. That's not surprising, is it? You can grow real fast, but to develop roots and depth of faith, that takes time. And you got to develop good leadership to get depth, right? If you grow too fast, how in the world do you train enough leaders, especially spiritual men, to help those Christians mature? What you end up getting is a lot of flaky leadership. Very poor leadership in your churches, and that's what's going on in Africa right now. We've spread tremendously, but it's extremely superficial. And there's 3 main reasons why it's so superficial right now. As I just said, Christianity has just exploded in Africa, but it's mostly been in the last 75 years, after World War II. Now, Christianity's been there a long time, but it was after World War II when Africa got exposed to the rest of the world, and we started sending so many missionaries, not just us, but denominational folks as well, started sending so many missionaries to Africa. I mean, we have seen explosive growth in Africa. In fact, nowhere in Christian history will you find more growth faster than we have had in Africa in the last 75 years. Nothing compares to it, the growth that we've seen in Africa in the last 75 years. It's just amazing. But as I said, we've got a lot of width, but we haven't had time. 75 years to develop depth is, you know, what you know, by the way, we've had 2,000 years, right? I know 2,000 years we've perfected it. Sarcasm. I'm sure you get that point. They've had 75 years, right? People's expectations sometimes are so unrealistic. As mine were when I first went to Africa, by the way. Another reason is Africans didn't grow up with a Christian worldview. Their moral compass is not ours. I mean, they don't look at it the same way, the world the same way as we do. Their religion, if I were to call it a religion, and it's not really because it's not organized, but their religious faith system, what spiritual system, the way they look at the world, is based basically on the spirit world. And the simple thing here, I have to be careful I get too deep with my time. Basically what it is if you do certain things, you perform certain rituals, it has a cause and effect on the spirit world. So if you go through the right ritual, you then will manipulate spirit power or influence spiritual beings or appease them or manipulate them to do what you want to. It's all about doing ritual. All right? So when they become Christians, that doesn't just go away. Now they're trying to deal with God that way. So, example. Since I first went to Africa in the 80s, I noticed Africans coming out of church on Sunday morning and they go, God is going to bless me. And I've had this conversation so many times. I ask, why do you say that? Because I went to church today and I put money in the collection plate. We took the Lord's Supper. We, in the Church of Christ, we didn't worship with an instrument. We did worship right. So God is going to bless me. And I say, yeah, but what about this woman you're saying you ain't married, you're drinking, or what about the fact that you're a policeman taking bribes on the road, or you're in the city, you know, the village government and you're taking bribes, or, you know, I could name 100 other things. You're a dishonest businessman. You know, yeah, but I went to church today. We took the Lord's Supper. We didn't worship with an instrument. You know, God is going to bless me. You see, they went through the ritual. This sounds very Catholic, by the way, if you notice. Because a lot of the roots in Catholicism came from pagan influence. Okay? During what we call the Dark Ages. But anyway, that's the way. And by the way, if you look at the Old Testament, this is what's going on with Israel in the Old Testament. This is a big problem. People think you can go through the rituals of a religion and it's going to give you blessings or the results you're after. And see, the way of Christ is a totally different mindset. It's a totally different worldview. And that takes time. Boy, is it hard to get people to see that. They just don't understand. Beating your wife is a spiritual issue. You know? Cheating someone, stealing from someone, that's not what Christians do. They don't get that. They just don't understand that. And then the third big thing is we haven't done a good job, not just Church of Christ, but denominations too. We haven't done a good job training leaders. We've run them through our Bible colleges and taught them a lot of Bible knowledge, but we didn't think about developing the character of the leaders. Because Africans are very spiritual. Now in America, because of secularism, we're not so spiritual. We don't realize it, but we're not very spiritual. Christians have become very secular in American culture. Africans will, they will outdo us spiritually. Okay? They believe in the spirit world. Believe me, they believe in the spirit world. They think there's demons and evil all behind every bush, okay? Don't walk through a dust devil, it'll curse you, you know, things like that. You know, but, you know, we've matured out of that, right? Matured. We're sophisticated Christians now. We don't look at the world that way. We've become very secular. We don't even realize it anymore, which is what's killing Christianity in the Western world right now, by the way. So, but Africans are very spiritual. However, we're far more righteous, if you know what I mean by righteousness in the Bible, than they are. But they're much more spiritual. So we missionaries, we see how spiritual are. We think that also means that, you know, that they're also righteous, and they're not. we've given them a lot of information and just totally blurred over the fact that their character was far from that of Jesus Christ. So we've not done a good job of training leaders. And when I started realizing this years ago, that's when I was trained to think that missions was about baptizing a lot of people and planting churches. And before long, I woke up to this and said, folks, I can plant a church any week of the year and baptize a bunch of people, but that doesn't mean I've made a disciple. I said, it's about obedience. It's about a life change. And I said, we need to it's not about church planting, it's about making disciples. And when I said that, I thought, I think I've heard that somewhere before. Like, Matthew 28, right?